My mother-in-law showed up at Sunday dinner and told me my unborn son belonged to her. She said I'd stolen her first grandson, my Ethan, the one we'd buried 18 months before, and now I owed her a replacement. I didn't argue that night. I just sat there, 28 weeks pregnant, holding my fork, and waited. Waited for the day we'd tell her the truth, that the baby wasn't a boy at all. And when that day finally came, I watched her whole world come apart. But it started like every other Sunday. The roast was in the oven. The green beans were sizzling in a pan on the stove, and I was standing at the kitchen sink breathing through a Braxton Hicks contraction when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on the dish towel at my waist and glanced at the clock. 5:47. Glenda was 13 minutes early. With Glenda, that was either a good sign or a very bad one, and it was usually the latter dressed up as the former. I got it, Daniel called from the living room. I heard his boots cross the hardwood, the front door open, that murmur of greeting he used with his mother. Warm, a little too careful, like he was handling something that might chip. 28 weeks. My belly had moved past, is she pregnant, into definitely pregnant, maybe twins, definitely don't ask. I'd stopped wearing anything with buttons. I'd stopped answering my phone on Sundays before 6, because Glenda always called to say she was on her way, then showed up early, and then I felt behind for the rest of the night. Smells wonderful in here, Glenda said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with that smile, the one that showed too many teeth and didn't reach her eye. She held a foil-covered dish and a crinkling dollar store peach cobbler, and a little something for the baby. My stomach did something unrelated to the contraction. You didn't have... Nonsense. Glenda set the dish down and patted my shoulder, the kind of pat that was more of a press, like she was checking for firm. How's my grandson? There. Glenda had decided in the first trimester that this baby was a, and no amount of we don't know yet had changed her. Daniel and I, we'd found out at the anatomy scan 4 weeks ago, a girl, and we hadn't told. Not for a gender reveal party, just because I wanted one thing that was still ours before Glenda found a way to make. He's kicking up worm, said, because correcting Glenda was like redirecting a river with a soup spoon. You ended up wet and frustrated and the river kept going. We moved table. The dining room, a round table that had been Daniel's mother's. 4s. A hutch that held Ethan. I didn't like to look at the hutch dinner. The little blanket. The sock monkey with wing missing. The framed photo of Ethan at 3 months. I'd been meaning to... 8 months. And I... Glenda said grace. Long, specific. Mentioning this new life growing within Martin's womb in a way that made me want to slide. 8. For a while it was normal. Daniel asked club. Glenda asked about his hospital project conquered. I ate green beans and tried not to think about the unread client email in my inbox. Then Glenda said, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. My fork paused mouth. That sentence from Glenda was the verbal equivalent of a torn siren. The air in the room changed. Daniel tightened. I set my fork down. Ethan, 4 months old. Pert, round, happy. He'd gone down for a nap at 10 in the morning up. The doctors at SIDS. They said there was nothing one could have done. That it wasn't my fault. I'd heard those words 100 times and still woke searching for him. Still felt the cold panic of that empty crib in my chest. Never said, your fault. What she'd funeral was, I always told you no stomach. I'd been too tired. To you. I think about a single day, Glenda said, dabbing her eyes. That beautiful boy, my grandson, time. Daniel reached for my hand under the table, his palm shaky. And have this new baby, Glenda said, and her voice shifted, softened and sharpened at once. A boy, second chance. Glenda, Daniel started. Let me finish, Daniel. I've been talking to Pastor Matthews. I've been praying on this, and the Lord thing on my heart went dry. This been with me. The words hung there. The roast got cold. Outside a dog barked. I'm sorry, I said. My own voice sounded from somewhere else. Calm. Too calm. Like my body had gone into shock. Catch up. After he's... Glenda said, as if this a vacation itinerary. The spare room all set up. Crib changing table, the works. I'm retiring. I've got the time. You and Daniel, you're both so busy with work, and after what happened with Ethan, well, wiggling. After what happened with Ethan, Daniel Low. You did anything wrong, Glenda said quickly, which was exactly how she said something wrong. But the fact remains, that boy's in your care and he didn't make it. This one, this new grandson, he deserves a fresh start. With someone who can give him the attention he needs. Someone who let him down. I stared. The woman across the table wore a floral blouse and pearl earrings, and the same lipstick she'd worn for 20 years. She looked like a grandmother. She sounded like a stranger. "This is my baby," I said. My voice was steady now. Steady and the ice is steady before it cracks. Not handing my baby over to any. "You're being emotional. Pregnancy hormones. I understand. About this more." "No," and tightened around mine. "We're not talking about this. There's nothing to talk about. This is our child. End of discussion." Glenda's smile flickered. Just for a second. Then it came back, bigger, brighter. "Of course. You're right. I shouldn't have sprung it on you. I just get out these boys of mine." She picked up her fork and took a bite of. "I'll let you two think it over." Dinner ended 20 minutes later. Glenda hugged us both at the door. I got the shoulder press again. Daniel got a kiss on the cheek and a murmured, "You'll understand when you're a." That made his jaw. Then she was. The house went quiet. I stood in the freeway, one hand on the other on the doorknob. I could hear Daniel in the kitchen, with more force than necessary. I should go help. I should think. But my feet wouldn't move. It fell on the console table by the door. The little ceramic dish where we kept our keys. And there, sitting on top of Daniel's truck, and my own car key. Silver, new. The kind you get copied at the hardware store, with a little plastic tag still attached. I picked it up. The tag, Glenda's loopy cursive and a single word. Front. By the end of that week, she'd called social services on me, told my husband's entire family I was drinking while pregnant, and sat in her car outside my obstetrician's office waiting for me to come out. I didn't sleep for 3 days, and when the locksmith left that Tuesday morning, I stood in my hallway and realized something I should have realized a long time ago. Glenda wasn't grieving. She was hunting. It started the morning after the dinner. I lay on my left side, the way the pregnancy app told me to, and stared at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above the bed, and every time the house made a sound, the furnace kicking on, a branch scraping the gutter, the ice maker in the fridge, I tensed. Daniel slept. Of course he did. He'd said, "I'll handle it," before we went to bed, which was Daniel for, "I will avoid this until it becomes unavoidable." And then he'd fallen asleep in 12 minutes. I listened to him breathe and thought about the key sitting on the kitchen counter, in a ceramic dish that used to hold candy corn at Halloween. At 6:30, I got up. I made coffee, decaf, which tasted like regret, and called a locksmith. The guy showed up at 8, rekeyed both doors in 40 minutes, and charged me $180 cash. He didn't ask questions. I liked him for that. Daniel came downstairs in sweatpants, rubbing his eyes, and saw the new deadbolt. "You called a lock?" "She had a key to our house." "I know, but no but." My voice came out sharper than I intended. I took a breath. "She walked into our house when we weren't. She copied our key. I don't know how many times she's been inside. I don't know what she's seen. I'm not living." Daniel looked at the new lock, then me. Okay. Right. He didn't say. That was the thing about Daniel. When he finally agreed with you, the problem was getting there. I called Priya on my way to the prenatal. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was between patients. Did what? Priya's voice went active. The way it did when she was about to say something that would make me feel both better and worse. "Marin, you lawyer. Like yesterday? It's not that. It is that. She's talking about taking her baby. That is not a let's wait and see situation. That is a call every family law attorney in a 50-mile radius." I squeezed. The high was clear, the kind of Tuesday morning that made Charlotte feel like a reasonable. She's not going to actually the baby. She's grieving. Grieving people don't copy keys, Marin. Grieving people go to therapy. They join support groups. They don't show up at your door demanding your child. Priya paused. "I'm saying this as your friend, and as someone who works in livery. Document everything. Every text, every call, every time he shows up somewhere. Save it all and get a lawyer." Said I'd think about it. I said that to a lot of things I had no intent. The prenatal appointment. Doctor marked my belly, listened to the heartbeat, strong, steady, 142, and asked any questions. I almost said thing, almost. But what would I say? My mother-in-law wants to take my baby? That sounded insane even to my own ears. So I said no, everything was fine, and scheduled the next. I was walking out to the parking garage of Glenda's car, a Buick Enclave, the kind with the world's best grandma license plate frame. It was parked 2 spaces over from my Honda, and Glenda was sitting in the driver's seat, entrance. Moving. My hand went to my belly, automatic, protective. Glenda saw me. She smiled and waved. This was a coincidence, like she'd just happened to be in the parking garage of my OB-GYN at 10:50 morning. I got to knock the doors and roll down the window. I pulled out of the space fast, the tires squealed, and in the rearview mirror I saw Glenda still sitting, still smiling, hand on the wheel. From the car. She was at my appointment, sitting in the waiting for me. A long pause. What did she want? I don't know. I didn't. I left. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Daniel, she followed me. Or she knew when my appointment was, which is worse. I'll get her, Daniel said. You always say that. I mean it this time. He didn't. I knew he didn't, because he was a liar. But because Daniel had been talking to his mother for 35 years, never changed. Talking to Glenda was with a weather system. You could stand in the rain and ask it to stop. That evening, Daniel's cousin Lisa called. I answered because Daniel was in the shower, and Lisa said, Marin, honey, got off the phone with Glenda, and she said some concerning things about you, about the baby. She said you're not taking your prenatal vitamins. She said you're drinking. She said your Daniel is worried about you. I sat on the bed. I'm not drinking. I take my vitamins. Daniel worried about me. I know. Told her that. But Marin, she's telling everybody. Aunt Rita, Uncle Ray, the whole church prayer chain. She's filming it like you're not, like someone needs to step in. I hit the wall. The shower was running. Somewhere in the house, the floor creaked. Lisa, I said. Did she say anything about a lawyer? Pause. She mentioned something about grandparent rights. Said at the church who knew an attorney. I didn't think much of it but now everything. Daniel came out of the shower with a towel around his waist and me sitting on the bed, phone in my lap, not crying, not moving. What's wrong? She's building a case, I said. She's telling the whole family I'm an unfit mother. She's talked to a lawyer about grandparent rights. She was at my appointment today, Daniel, for me in the parking garage. Daniel's face went through several things at once. Surprise, that old familiar guilt. I'll call her right now. No, I stood up. My voice was steady. No more calling. No more talking. We're getting a lawyer. We're documenting everything. And if she goes again, we're calling the police. Daniel looked at me. For a second, he didn't recognize me. Then he did, and something in his face settled. Okay, let's do it. We spent the next hour making a list. Every incident, every comment, every tossed a line going back to Ethan's funeral. I wrote it all down in a notebook, my handwriting getting tighter as the pages filled. Daniel called a family law attorney his co-custody case and left a message. It was almost 9 when we looked at each other. Daniel went through the peephole. Buddy. He opened it anyway, and there, on the welcome mat, was a white business card held down by a rock. Berg County Department of Social Services. Adult and Child Protective Services. A name, a phone number. I picked it up. The card was clean, crisp, official. Just the card, left like a summons. Anonymous report, Daniel said, reading the small print back. They always leave a card with. I turned the card over in my hand. The rock that had held it down was one from our own garden. The smooth helped us arrange the previous. I looked up at Daniel. She called DSS on us. The neighbors called the police. My mother-in-law screamed a dead baby's name until her voice gave out. And my husband stood in the middle of her living room and told her he was done being the twin who lived. None of it would have happened if we hadn't decided to tell her the truth. We thought knowing it was a girl would set her free. It broke her instead. The idea came to me on Thursday night. The DSS caseworker had just left. Angela, with her sensible shoes and her notebook that never closed. And I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my hands still shaking too hard to close the deadbolt. Daniel had to do it for me. Lying in the dark, I said the thing I'd been turning over since Tuesday. What if we tell her? Daniel rolled over. Tell who what, Glenda? Tell her the baby is a girl. The room was dark. I couldn't see his face, but I heard the pause. Why would we do that? Because her whole thing is about a grandson. A replacement for Ethan, for whoever else she lost. If it's a girl, the whole logic falls apart. She can't replace a boy with a girl. It breaks the narrative, or it makes her angry. But right now she thinks she's getting a grandson. She's telling everyone it's a boy. She's probably bought a closet full of blue onesies. If we don't tell her, she's just going to keep building this fantasy. If we do, I trip. Maybe she'll finally see that this baby isn't a replacement for. Daniel was quiet for a long time. My mom had a. What? David. He died at birth. My mom was in labor with both of them. David. His voice flat. The way it got when he was talking about something he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten was there. She never got it. Not when I was a kid. But I found a death certificate in her jewelry box once. And there's a photo in the attic. 2 bassinets, but only. I reached for his hair. She never. Not once. I always knew. I always felt like I was supposed to be 2 people. Like I was living with us. He swallowed. When Ethan was born, she held him. She cried, and she said, "He looks David." I'd never seen David, but she said it like it was the most important. I held his hand. I didn't say anything. There's nothing to say. Okay. Daniel said finally, "Okay, we'll tell her. But we do it on our terms, not at our house." We went to Glenda's apartment Saturday morning. I'd called ahead. She answered on the first ring and, delighted, said I'd come around. And we drove the 20 minutes to the retirement community where she lived. The kind with a fountain in the lobby and bridge club. Glenda was clean. Too clean. The kind of clean that meant someone had been scrubbing baseboards at 6 in the morning. She had coffee ready and those little buttermilks in a crystal bowl, and she was wearing those again. "I'm so glad you came to your senses," she said, leading us to the living room. "I've been praying for you. Both of you. The works in mysterious." "Mom." Dan's voice cut through hers. "We're here to agree with you." The smile didn't move, eyes narrowed. "The baby?" I said. "We found out at the anatomy scan 4 weeks ago." "Of course you did. A boy." "The Lord. It's a girl, Glenda." The word like a stone in water. Glenda blinked. Once, twice, mouth opened and closed. "A girl," she repeated. "A girl, healthy, strong, due in November." I kept my voice even. "So there is a son to replace Ethan. Their grandson to take home with you. This baby is a girl, and she is ours, and you need to stop." Glenda sat down. Slow, her knees had given out. She stared at the coffee table. The butter rattled in the crystal bowl. Her hand was... She... Quiet. Almost her. "No." Loud now. She stood up. The crystal bowl tipped, scattering across the carpet. "You're lying. You're lying to me. The Lord told me it was a boy. Pastor Matt prayed on it, and he said a boy would come, replace what was taken. He was taken, Mom." Daniel's voice was shaking not the same way. "Ethan got sick. It happens. His fault. And David died before he ever took a breath. It was 35 years ago. You have been living for 35 years. Been making me live in it with, and I am done." Glenda stared at him. Her face was changing, crumpling, rearranging, the grandmother mask slipping off to reveal it underneath. She said. Her voice cracked. "David was supposed to be here. He was supposed to grow up, get married, have babies. And instead I got you. Just you. Half of what I was supposed to have. And then Ethan was David. I know he was. He came, and you let him die. You let my boy die again." She picked up the table. "Not the whole thing." She grabbed the edge and flipped it. The lamp on top went crashing into the wall, and the framed photo of Ethan, the mantle, fell, and... "You killed..." She screamed. "You killed my grandson and trying to tell me this one isn't even a boy? You think I'm stupid? You think I won't find him? I will find my grandson. I will." The neighbor's bell. Someone called 911. I grabbed Daniel's arm. He was standing there, face white, watching him, and pulled him toward the door. Glenn was yelling, still throwing things. And when we stepped into the hallway, we could hear her through the door, David's name over and over. The police arrived in 4 minutes. 2 uniformed officers, a woman and a man. They talked to Glenda, to us. They called paramedics. And then they Glenda to the hospital on a psychiatric hold. 72 hours, voluntary, for evaluation. In the car in the parking garage and cried. Not the quiet, controlled crying I did in therapy. The ugly kind, the kind that made my nose run and my shoulders. Daniel held me and didn't say anything, and the baby kicked, once, trying to tell us something. On Monday morning, my phone rang. The hospital. Glenda was being released. The evaluation said she was in imminent danger to herself or others. She had a referral to a psychiatrist. She had a prescription, and she had my address. The caseworker said it in the calmest voice possible, like she was reading a grocery list. A social worker would be in the delivery room when I gave birth. They would examine the baby before they let me take her home. And in some cases, she said, the baby doesn't go home at all. I sat on my couch and held my belly and thought about my daughter, and I called the one person I'd been avoiding for 5 years, but Glenda called first. From the hospital parking lot. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Because the lawyer still hadn't called back and the DSS caseworker was coming at 2, and my brain was operating on about 4 hours of sleep and decaf coffee. Maren? Glenda's voice was small, meek, the voice she used when she wanted something. Honey, I am so sorry about Saturday. I don't know what came over me. The doctor says I had an episode. He gave me some pills. I'm feeling much better now. I said nothing. I was standing in the kitchen, watching a cardinal eat from the feeder outside the window. The bird was red and bright and completely indifferent to everything happening inside the house. I just want to put this all behind us, Glenda continued. Families, we say things we don't mean. I forgive you, Maren, for the things you said, for calling the police on your own mother-in-law. I forgive you, and I think we should... I didn't call the police, I said. Your neighbor, because you were screaming and throwing furniture. A pause. Well, regardless, I'm willing to move for the sake of the baby. My grandson, it's a girl. Another was. Longer time. Then Glenn laughed. A short, sharp sound that wasn't allowed. You're still going with that. Okay, Karen. You just keep telling yourself whatever you... But I... And when that boy is born, we'll see. I stood there with the phone at my ear and the cardinal flew away and I thought, she's not better at all. She's better. Angela from DSS wrote it too. She sat at the kitchen table with her notebook and her sensible shoes. I need to be transparent. The anonymous report, combined with the police incident on Saturday, this is now a formal not a wellness check, an investigation. My mouth went dry. That mean? It means we'll be doing a more thorough assessment. Home visits, interviews, a review of your medical and mental health records, and because the child is yet born, we'll need to coordinate with the hospital for a safety evaluation. A safety... Daniel was leaning against the counter, arms crossed. Look like. A caseworker will be present at the hospital when the child will be examined, and will do an assessment of the home environment before the baby is discharged. In most cases, the baby goes home with the parents. But in some cases they don't, I said. And it. She just wrote a notebook. After Angela left, I did the thing I'd been avoiding for years. I found Karen's number in his old phone. He still had it, even though they hadn't spoken Christmas fight. I called it. Karening. Who is this? Karen? It's Maren, Daniel's wife. A long silence. Is Daniel okay? He's fine. We need your help. It's about your mom. Karen sighed. The kind of sigh somewhere deep. Somewhere that had been holding its breath for a long time. What did she do now? I told her. Everything. The demand at dinner. The key. The parking garage. DSS. The apartment. The police. The hospital. I talked for 15 minutes, and when I was done, Karen was quiet. She did the same thing to me, Karen said finally, when Aiden, my first. She showed up with a car seat. Told the nurses she was taking the baby home because I was too responsible. She told my was using drugs. She told our pastor I was an unfit mother. I had to get a lawyer, a restrainer, the whole thing. I closed my eye. Why didn't you tell us? Because when I tried, Dan, she's just grieving her time. And your husband has never been good at seeing his victim. Karen's voice was, but not at me. At the memory, hospitalized once, you know. After your father-in-law died, nervous breakdown, they called it. In the hospital for 10 days. She never told Daniel. She made me promise not to tell him. It would upset him. I looked at Daniel, who was in the living room. He wasn't really watching. Karen, I need you to tell him. I need you to tell him all of it. Because he still thinks she's just grieving. He's still enough she'll come around. Karen was quiet. I'll be there tomorrow. She'd attend the next morning with a folder. A folder labeled in her neat handing, full of documents, police reports from the hospital incident, the restraining order, medical records from Glenda's 2018 hospitalization, emails, text screenshots, a timeline going back 12 years. He laid it all out on the dining room table, and Daniel sat there and read every page, and his face got quieter and quieter, the way it did when he was too big for words. He looked at his sister. You went through all of this alone. I had Aiden. I had a good lawyer. Karen table and put her hand on his. You don't have to do this alone. But you have to stop protecting her. She's not a victim, Daniel. She's sick. And she's dangerous. And if you don't stop making excuses, she's going to take your baby. Daniel didn't say anything. He picked up his phone and called the lawyer back. And this time when the voicemail picked up, he left a message that said, My name is Daniel Cole. My wife is 29 weeks pregnant and my mother is child. Today. That evening, Angela called. The safety evaluation at birth scheduled. The hospital had been notified. A caseworker would be in the delivery room. I sat on the couch and held my belly, thought about the baby. Our girl. Our Wren. We'd already named her in the quiet of our bedroom. The name we hadn't told anyone. And I thought about what it would be like to and have a stranger sitting there. Taking notes. Good enough to keep my own child. Daniel sat next to me and put his arm around me. For the first time, he didn't say, "It'll be okay." He said, "We're going to fight." She stood at the end of my driveway in the rain for 40 minutes, holding a blue baby blanket like an offering. The police cited her for violating the restraining order and told her not to come back. She left the blanket there. I still have it, folded in a drawer, because it's evidence. Because it's the closest thing I have to proof that some people will love a fantasy so hard, they'll destroy a real family trying to reach it. The lawyer's name was Denise Reyes. She was 42, wore blazers with sneakers, and had a desk covered in case files that leaned at dangerous angles. She listened to Daniel and me for 40 minutes, took notes on a legal pad, and then said, "You have two problems. One is your mother-in-law. The other is DSS. We handle them separately, but we use the same evidence for both." She outlined it on a whiteboard, the kind with markers that squeak. Restraining order first. That was straightforward. Documented harassment, unauthorized entry, the police incident, the psychiatric hold. A judge would grant it, then using the restraining order and the evidence package. We'd respond to DSS with a formal submission proving I was a fit parent, and Glenda was the actual risk. For DSS, I need 3 things, Denise said, ticking them off. 1. A current psychological evaluation from a licensed therapist saying you're mentally fit to parent. Witness statements from people who know, friends, neighbors, co-workers, attesting to your stability. 3. Everything you have on Glenda. Texts, voicemails, the key, police reports, medical records. The more we can show she's the threat, the less DSS worries about. I left the office with a checklist and a retainer agreement that cost more than my first car. I didn't. For the first time since that Sunday, I felt like I was doing something instead of waiting for the next thing to. The therapist evaluation took. Dr. The grief counselor I'd been seeing since, wrote a 4-page letter that I read twice and cried through both times. It said I had complex but well-managed grief, that I was highly motivated and engaged in, that I showed excellent insight into my emotional, strong coping skills, and that there was no evidence of any condition that would impair my ability. I kept it in my bag, full half, and sometimes when I was waiting in line at the grocery store or sitting in a parking lot, I'd take it out and read the last paragraph. Priya wrote her statement in one sitting on her lunch break. It was 2 pages, spaced, and it said like, "I have known Maren for 11 years, and she is the most responsible person, and if anyone tries to tell you she's fit, they have." She also included her professional opinion as an L. Maren follows every prenatal instruction, attends every appointment, and has a robust support system. I would trust her with any infant. The neighbors, Tom and Linda across the street, who'd brought meals after Ethan died. So did my client. A small publishing house in Asheville said I was reliable, professional, and consistently delivered high quality. It wasn't a character rep for parenting. Exactly, but it was evidence of stability. And Denise said it counted. Karen's folder went into the evidence. The 2018 hospitalization, the 2019 restraining order, the police report from the hospital where Glenda had. Karen also wrote a new statement, specifically about the situation, and she signed it in front of a notary. Daniel wrote his own statement at the kitchen table, late at night. He didn't show it to this morning. It was 3 pages, typed, and it said things he never said out loud. Not to me, not to Karen, herself. About David. About growing up as lived. His mother's grief, and how it had shaped every decision made. About Ethan, and how he had his own guilt, and how his mother had used that guilt to control him. About the key, and the dinner, and the parking garage, and the apartment. Was, I am no longer willing to protect my mother at the expense of my child. I read it and this is good, I said. Really good. He looked at me, and his eyes were, and he said, I should have to go. We filed the restraining order Tuesday. Did the court filing. A judge granted the temporary order ex parte that afternoon. Glenda couldn't come within feet of me, or our home, couldn't contact us directly through third parties, couldn't go near my doctor's office or the hospital where I'd deliver. The sheriff served her at her on Wednesday morning. I found out because I called Daniel's phone. She'd gotten a new number. Somehow, she'd remembered the old one, and screamed at him for 9. He hung up. She called back. He didn't answer. She called again. She showed up at 7 that evening. Kitchen window. Glenda was standing at the end of the driveway, in the rain, wearing that floral blouse and holding a plastic bag. She wasn't approaching the house. She was just standing there, staring at the front door, the rain soaking her hair, the bag hammering. Called 911. Stood at the window and watched. Kicked, and I thought, this is what it loses control. Not screaming, not throwing furniture, just standing in the rain at the end of a driveway, able to make herself leave. They arrived in 6 minutes. They talked to Glenda. They cited her for violating the restraining order. They came back, she'd be arrested. She got in her car and left, and the plastic bag was still sitting at the end of the police drove away. Went out and got it. He brought it inside, on the kitchen table, and opened it. Inside was a baby, folded neatly. And a handwritten note in Glenda's loopy cursive, for my grandson, stop fighting for you. I looked at the blanket, the note, the rain dripped plastic onto our kitchen floor. I said. Daniel folded the note back up. She's going to do that until the baby is born, and then. He didn't answer. Next morning, he called Denise and said, we need to move up the hearing. We can't wait until after the baby is born. The judge said 4 words and my mother-in-law's entire case dissolved. The child is female, just like that. The replacement grandson she'd been building in her head for 7 months. The boy she'd prayed for, fought for, lied for, gone. 4 words. She sat down so hard the chair scraped the courtroom floor, and I watched the woman who'd tried to take my baby realize she'd been fighting a ghost. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and lemon disinfectant. I sat at the table, though it wasn't a trial. Not really. Just a hearing on the permanent restraining order and the DSS review, and folded my hands in my lap so they wouldn't see me shaking. 34 weeks. My belly pressed against the wood, and the baby had been moving since 5 that morning, like she knew something was happening. Daniel sat next to me. He was wearing the one suit he owned, the one he'd worn to Ethan's funeral, to his father's funeral, to 3 weddings that hadn't happened because of COVID. He'd gotten it dry clean. He hadn't slept. I could tell by the way he kept blinking, slow, like he was trying to keep his eyes open by will alone. Denise was at the table too, shuffling papers, calm as a lake. She'd gone over everything with us twice. What to say, what not to say, how to sit, how to react when Glenda spoke. Don't engage, don't make eye contact if she tries to get a rise out. Let me do the talking. Glenda was at the other table. She'd found a lawyer through her a young man in a suit that was too big, with a tie that had fish. He looked. Glenda looked. She was wearing a different floral blouse today, and her hair was done. And she was holding a Bible in her lap like a. The judge was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses on it. She called the hearing to order. This is a matter concerning a petition for a permanent restraining order and a concurrent review by the Department of Social Services. Let's begin with the petitioner's. Didn't stood up. She didn't stand. She laid it out, piece by piece, the way you'd lay out a puzzle on a table. The copied key, the timeline of harassment, the parking garage incident, the DSS report, the police incident at Glenda's apartment, the psychiatric hold, the prior restraining order from 19, the 2018 hospitalization, Karen's testimony read into the record, Daniel's statement, Dr. Patel's evaluation, the statements. She talked for. When she was done, the quiet. Glenda stood up. He was younger, and his act once. Your Honor, my client is a grandmother. She lost her husband 8 years ago. She lost a grandson 18 months SIDS. She has been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, for which she is now receiving treatment. Her concern for this child, however expressed, stems from love, malice. She's not a danger to anyone. She is a 62-year-old woman who wants to be part of life. The judge looked at Glenda. Ms. Cole, like to speak? Glenda stood up. She held to her chest. Your Honor, I just want for that baby. I lost my son David at birth. I lost my grandson Ethan. I have buried 2 boys, I will not bury a 3rd. If Marin can't handle this, if she's too fragile, then let me help. Let me be there. Let me raise this child the way raised. The child, Ms. Cole, the judge said, glancing at the medical records Denise had submitted. The ultrasound and the physician's statement both female fetus. Very still. Glenda blinked. She looked at her lawyer. He looked at his shoes. She looked back at the judge. That lie, she said. Her voice was rising. They're lying. They've been lying this whole time. It's a boy. The Lord told me. Pastor Matthews prayed. He said a son. Ms. Cole. Judge's voice was firm. The medical record is clear. The child is male. Do you understand? Glenda sat hard. Her hands were gripping the knuckles were white. She was breathing fast, shallow, and I could see it from across the room, the mask cracking, the composure slipping. The same thing that had happened in the apartment, but this time in a courtroom, in front of a judge. I want Daniel to speak, Glenda said. Her voice was raw now. Let son speak. Daniel, tell them about did. Tell them about Ethan. Tell them what she did. Ms. Cole, that's not. Let him speak. Glenda stood up again. The figure tried to pull her back. Shook him off. He knows. He knows she let Ethan die. He knows he's not fit. He's just afraid of her. Aren't you, Daniel? Aren't you afraid of what she'll do if you tell the truth? The room was silent. Everyone looked at Daniel. Dan stood up. He didn't. He looked at the judge. Your Honor said. His voice was quiet. The courtroom was so still you could hear it. My mother had a twin, David. He died at birth. I am the one who lived. My whole life, I have felt like I was carrying him, like I something because I survived and he didn't. Paused. Swallowed. When my son Ethan died, Mother held me, and she said, at least you still have each other. I turned to my wife, and she said, not to put him on his stomach. Marin didn't put him on his stomach, but my mother needed someone, and she chose Marin. Because blaming herself, saying that bad things just she can't live with that. Looked at Glenda then, for the first time. I love you, Mom, but you are sick. And you have been sick for a very long time. And I am not going to let you make my wife and my daughter be 5 years ago. He sat down. Glenda was crying, not the dabbing eyes with a napkin crying, the open-mouthed gasping. Her lawyer put a hand. She didn't seem to notice. The judge read her decision from the bench. Permanent restraining order, 1 year, with a requirement that Glenda complete a psychiatric evaluation and follow treatment recommendations. No contact with me, Daniel, child. The DSS case was closed. No findings of no safety evaluation at birth. Judge wished us well and adjourned. Courthouse into October sunlight. I blinked. The air smelled like leaves and exhaust. And his palm was sweaty. 34 weeks, he said. 34 weeks, agreed. She's going to be here soon. I looked. His eyes were red, but he was a small, tired, real smile. I put my hand on Ellie and the baby kicked and was, like she was answering. Yeah, I said. She is. We walked to the car. Neither of us looked back. I brought her to the cemetery when she was 6 weeks old. I laid a daisy on her brother's grave and I said, "This is your sister," and my voice cracked and the baby slept through all of it. I used to think healing meant forgetting. It doesn't. It means carrying both of them, the one in the ground and the one in the car seat, and learning that your arms are big enough for both. But before any of that, there was the birth. My water broke at 2:17 in the morning, 3 weeks after the hearing. I woke up wet and confused and then very, very awake, and I shook Daniel and said, "It's time," and he fell out of bed. The drive to the hospital was quiet. Daniel held my hand across the center console and ran every red light on the way there, which was unlike him, and I didn't have the breath to tell him to slow down. The contractions were 4 minutes apart by the time we walked through the ER doors, and Priya was there. She'd picked up an extra shift when I texted her, because that's the kind of friend Priya was, and she said about time and wheeled me upstairs herself. No DSS caseworker, no stranger with a notebook, just me, Daniel, Priya, and Dr. Marsh, who'd been called in and arrived with her hair in a ponytail and coffee in a travel mug. Renelise Cole was born at 6:43 a.m. She was 6 pounds, 11 ounces, with 10 fingers and 10 toes, and a shock of dark hair that stuck up in every direction. She cried immediately, loud and angry and alive, and I cried too, and Daniel cried, and even Priya wiped her eyes and said, "Don't tell anyone I did that." We counted her fingers. We took blurry photos with the hospital camera. I nursed her, and Ren latched on like she'd been doing it her whole life, and this is what it feels like. This is the thing I was afraid I'd never get to have. We brought her home on a Tuesday. The house was closed. Karen had come over while we were at the hospital, and stocked the fridge and changed the sheets, and left a bouquet of daisies on the kitchen table. The new deadbolt turned smooth. The windows were lit. I checked them all twice before I sat. The first week was a blur of feedings and diapers and the kind of exhaustion that makes time feel like. Daniel took 3 weeks off from. He got up. He changed diapers. He learned to. He sat in the rocking chair at 3 in the morning and held Ren against his chest and talked to her in a voice I'd never heard. Worried, like he had all the time. Safe, he said. When Ren was fussy and, "You're safe, little girl. Nobody is going to take you from us." I stood in the door and listened. I did anything. I just stood there in the dark and thought about how much he'd changed since that. How he'd gone from "I'll handle it" to actually. Karen came on the second weekend. She brought lasagna and a bag of baby clothes that Aiden had grown, and she held Ren for an hour and didn't say a word about Glenda. "In treatment," Karen said, fully, like she was handling something fragile. "It's an outpatient, 3 days a week. She called me last week, wanted to know if she..." "What did you say?" I said no, not yet, maybe never. The choice to make, whether she gets better enough. But I took in touch. As long as in treatment. Karen looked at me. "She asked about you, said she was sorry, said she didn't remember half of what happened." I nodded. I believe I didn't remember. That was the thing about mental illness. It could be that way. "You okay?" Karen shrugged. "I don't know. I hope so, for her sake. But her getting better isn't our responsibility. It's hers." Daniel started therapy the week Ren turned 1 month old. A man named Dr. Rosenberg, who specialized in grief and family trauma. Daniel every Wednesday at noon, and he came quieter than usual. And then after a few weeks, we started talking. About David, about growing up, about the day Ethan died and how he'd felt, standing in the nursery, in the empty blanket, and how his mother's voice in his ear heading in the room. I listened. I didn't fix it. On a Saturday in late November, Ren was 6 weeks old, cemetery alone. Daniel stayed home with the baby. I was by myself. I brought him with me in the car seat because Harry was quiet. He skittered across the grass. Ethan's grave was small, a flat marker with his name and dates, and a little lamb carved into the stone. Knelt down, awkwardly, as my body was still recovering, and Daisy on the marker. "Hey, Bug," I said. It was the nickname I'd had for him, the one I had out loud in over a year. "I brought someone to meet you. This is your sister, Ren. She's loud. She has your dad's chin. It's in her sleep just like you did." My voice cracked. Wiped my eye with the back of my hand. "I miss you. Every day. I don't think that'll ever stop. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my life feeling guilty for something I couldn't control. I think you'd want me to be happy, want her to be happy." I sat there for a long time. The sun came out from behind and warmed the back of my neck. Ren made a small noise in the car back to sleep. "I love you," I said to Marker. "I'll always love you. And I'm going to tell her about you. Every day. She'll know who brother was." Stood up. My knees popped. I brushed leaves off my jeans and got back in the car. And I didn't look in the mirror because I didn't need to. I knew where he was. He was in the daisy on the stone, and in the baby in the back seat, and in the way the light hit her at 4 in the afternoon. Everywhere, and that was enough. We had dinner on Sunday. Not the old Sunday dinner. The one with Glenda and the peach cobbler and the long and the things left unsaid. A new one. Priya came, and Karen brought Aiden and Tyler, and the boys ran through the house screaming, and Daniel chased them, and Ren slid the net by the table. I set the table. The hutch was still there. Ethan's things were in a memory box. Wooden, hand-painted, sitting on the top shelf, but didn't have to look at it every day. The sock mug in the box, too. The blue blanket. The photo. I'd put them away not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to remember them without the weight of them being out. We ate lasagna. The boys spilled juice. Priya told a story about a friend who'd tried to name her baby, and the nurse had talked her out of it. Karen laughed hard she laughed, and Aiden, "Mom, that's it," and everyone laughed hard. I looked around the table. My husband, my best friend, my sister-in-law who was more of a sister than most sisters, 2 boys who called me Aunt Marin to know when they could hold the baby again. And Ren, small and warm, and mine. The front door was locked. The deadbolt was the new one. The key that Glenda had copied was in an evidence envelope, and I hadn't thought about it in weeks. I put a glass of sweet tea still, and took a sip. Daniel my eye from across the table. He smiled. I smiled back. It was perfect. Glenda was still out there, still sick, still a person I'd have to reckon with, say. The restraining order would expire. We'd have to make then. About Ren knowing her grandmother. What forgiveness looked like. But not today. Today, the house was full. The baby was sleeping. Anya was good. And I, Marin Cole, 33 years old, 2, one in my arms and one in the ground, felt for the first time in a very long like I was exactly where I was supposed to be.